This is Strategy Games with Strategy James, and today we're going to learn how to play The Edge Dawnfall. The Edge Dawnfall is a dark fantasy skirmish game produced by Awakened Realms in 2018 and designed by Michael Oratz. It is a medium difficulty game for 1 to 4 players that plays in about 60 to 90 minutes. To give a good foundation for the game, I will only be focusing on the 1 versus 1 skirmish mode. In The Edge Dawnfall, you must lead one of 6 factions to war in this dark steampunk fantasy world. Your goal is to either kill all your opponent's models, gain a 7-point victory lead, or have the most victory points after an action deck is depleted. You will command one of the following armies to victory. The Chapter, human worshippers of the One, who fight for the survival of humanity with many technological advances. The Demons, a brutish amalgamation of various species collected over the eons, forced into eternal war on multiple worlds. The Dvargar, a race of machine-crafting perfectionists who until recently were enslaved by the demons. They fight for their freedom and against any other faction who dare challenge them. The Faceless, insatiable hordes of man merged with machine, held together through a soul crystal. They feed on living or dying organic matter and seek to consume anything in their wake. Reborn, the personification of nature's wrath, this tree-dwelling race have had enough of the war which devastates their home. Now they come out of the thickets to purge all and reset the natural balance. The Razak, a futuristic race with technology that far surpasses anything this world has ever seen. Lost out of time and space, with no knowledge of themselves, they seek to re-establish a link to their source, silencing any foe who gets in the way. Let's get to the board to set up a 2-player game of The Edge Dawnfall. The board will be set up so that players sit at the long edges. Each player will get a yellow and a red die. Set aside 20 crystals and 20 charge tokens. Each player will roll the red die to determine who receives the first player marker. The first player will choose their faction and gather all elements of that faction. It is handy to refer to the faction sheet for all the different items to retrieve. The second player then chooses their faction. Each player then plants their banner cards. Now, you will need to select 5 squads and place the squad cards with the basic mode side up on the board. For beginners, a pre-selected army can be found on the faction sheet. Distribute the endurance tokens to each card, represented by the shield icon. Now prepare your action deck of 25 cards and place it on the board. For beginners, a pre-constructed deck is shown on the faction sheet. The first player chooses whether to become the positioning player, which is the player that will initiate deployment, or the countering player, who will begin the first turn. The positioning player now places their shrine anywhere on the board, followed by the other player. But they must place their shrine at least 2 spaces away from the other shrine. Players then take turns, starting with the positioning player, to place 2 crystal sources each on the board. Again, crystal sources must be at least 2 spaces away from any shrine and any other crystal source. Now players will take turns, starting with the positioning player, to strategically place 1 squad at a time anywhere around the board, following these rules. First, an entire model must fit inside a single space. Second, a model cannot be base to base with any shrine, crystal source, or enemy model. Third, if there is more than 1 model in a squad, the models must be placed in base to base with at least 1 other model of the squad. After the forces have been set up, the victory marker and faction tokens are placed on the victory track. Each player will receive 2 starting crystals to their crystal pool. Lastly, players draw 3 cards to their hand, and the game is ready to begin. At the start of a match, the positioning player may move one of their squads to balance the advantage of the first player. Now the countering player begins the first turn. At the beginning of each player's turn, they must decide whether to take a passive turn or an active turn. During a passive turn, the player does the following. Harvest. The player gathers a crystal from the pool for each crystal source they control. Charge enhancements. All the player's enhancement cards gain 1 charge. Refresh crystals. All the depleted crystals move to their active pool. And refresh banner. The banner is flipped over to the active side. It is important to note that nothing else can be done on a passive turn. No cards can be played by either player, and no cards can be discarded. During an active turn, a player can play cards, use their banner, and activate a single squad. Any cards can be played at any time during the active turn, regardless of which squad is activated. I will talk more on playing cards and their anatomy at the end of the video. When you activate a squad, you first need to decide if you want to change the mode or flip the card to the reverse side. The activated squad may move and initiate combat, or initiate combat and then move, with all models in the squad. Lastly, at the end of the active turn, you may discard 1 card. After that, both players draw to 3 cards. Now let's go deeper into the key elements of the game. Each squad has a squad card with all of the stats you need. The blue stat is your initiative, which tells you when you will act in combat and your susceptibility to getting shot. The red stat is your attack strength. The green is your defense, and the brown is your movement. The white diamonds show how many models there are in this squad. The shield shows how much endurance your squad has. The gray arrow indicates that the squad can change modes, from basic mode to a different mode. This means that each squad has 2 possible stat lines, giving a lot of flexibility to the game. Some modes cause crystals to change, and some require cards. Crystals are the main source of currency in the game. They are used to play most action cards and sway probability to your favor. You start with a limited number of crystals, but can gain more throughout the game by controlling crystal sources. To control a crystal source, you must have at least 1 model in base-to-base contact with it, and there cannot be any enemies in base-to-base with the same source. When you use crystals, they go to your depleted crystal zone and can be refreshed during a passive turn. You can also substitute endurance tokens or victory points for crystals. There is no limit to the number of times you can do this. For example, if you need a crystal but have no more crystals, you can instead use an endurance from a squad or give your opponent a victory point to substitute that crystal. Crystals will often be used when rolling dice. The game comes with a yellow and red die. The yellow die is the default and has 2 0 sides and a 1 to 4 side. The red die requires you to pay a crystal to roll instead of the yellow die, and it has 1 to 6 values. This is a huge difference, shifting probability to your side. There is also cogs on the 0 sides of the yellow and the 1 and 2 sides of the red. When these cogs are rolled, you can either accept the roll and replenish 1 spent crystal, or you can spend another crystal to re-roll the die, accepting the re-roll result. It is worth noting that you can never re-roll a die more than once during a roll. We move now to one of the most innovative movement systems I have ever seen. The board is made up of spaces and hexes. A hex refers to the small hex, whereas a space is the large hex and contains 7 hexes within a thick border. Your movement value counts the number of spaces you can move. You can end your movement on any hexes within the space. You cannot have the model cross outside a space. Pushing is an integral part of the game. To push a model, you have to have a larger base than the pushed model. When you push a model, remove it from the board, place your model where it was, then place the pushed model in any hex base to base with your model. You can push multiple smaller base models with a single model. If you push, that immediately ends your movement. During a movement, a model can move through any space that it could occupy with its base, regardless of facing. If your model cannot fit in a space, you cannot move through it. But you may be able to push units in that space. But again, this would end your movement. Let's discuss how combat works. Combat can be initiated by each active squad model against an enemy in base-to-base contact. First, initiative is compared between the models, and the higher initiative model will attack first, regardless who initiated the combat. The attacking player chooses which die, either the yellow or pays a crystal for the red, and rolls it. The rolled result plus the model's attack stat are added to give the total power of the attack. The defender chooses a die, again either the yellow or pays a crystal for the red, and rolls it. The rolled result plus the model's defense stat are added to give the total defense. If the attack power is greater than the defense power, the model receives 1 wound. If the squad has any endurance tokens, a token is removed due to the wound. If not, the model is removed. If the defense power is equal or greater than the attack power, then no wounds are given and the defender can counterattack. To counterattack, the defender repeats the combat sequence but is now the attacker. There are a few abilities which can deviate from the combat sequence. The first is backstabbing, which follows most of the combat sequence, except the enemy automatically loses the initiative and may not counterattack. The other is shooting. Shooting is very different from normal combat and requires an action card to be played. These cards come in a variety of abilities, such as firing a gun, casting a fireball, or even self-destructing. All these action cards will specify to check for hit and effect. They may also have either line of fire or a range requirement. To check for hit, the shooting player chooses either the yellow die or pays for the red die. They then roll the die and compare the result to all targets' initiative values. If the roll is higher than the initiative, the effect happens to those models. If the roll is equal or lower than the initiative, nothing happens. Line of fire must be in a straight line through several spaces that have at least a single unoccupied hex. The range is the maximum number of spaces from the shooter. So what happens when a model is killed due to a wound? The opponent earns a number of victory points equal to the squad's endurance value. This is the only way to earn victory points, so you must kill units. The only exception is the sacrifice ability, which is specific to some action cards. The opponent does not gain any victory points from a sacrifice. The victory point track acts like a tug of war, going back and forth as players kill units. Okay, we are going to finish up by talking about the action cards, which are the most important part of the game. There are 2 types of action cards, a normal action card and an enhancement card. I will start by going over the normal action cards. All the action cards have a top and bottom action. Only one of the 2 actions can be chosen when playing the card. The top action can be used by any squad. The bottom action can be used only by the specific squad labeled in the center of the card. Each action has a crystal cost that needs to be paid in order to play the card. Again, you can play action cards at any time during your turn except between the attack roll and defense roll unless the card specifically affects the defense. However, if the action has a white border and a lightning bolt, it can be played as an instant, meaning it can be played on your opponent's active turn. After the action card is played, it is discarded and never seen again. The other action card is enhancement cards. These cards cost 1 crystal to attach to a squad. You can attach the enhancement to any squad, but if you want to use the bottom ability, it must be attached to the specific squad. After you attach the enhancement, it gets 1 charge counter. To use an ability on the enhancement, you must discard the appropriate number of charge counters. You can get more charge counters from some action cards and on the passive turn. You can attach up to 2 enhancements on each squad. However, you can never attach more than 1 copy of the same enhancement cards to a single squad. The passive symbol on an enhancement card allows you to pay the charge amount once and attach a passive token to the card. From now on, that ability is always active. Lastly, each faction comes with a faction sheet, which summarizes everything you need to know about your faction. On the front, starting from the left, you have a bit of the lore for the faction, followed by a tactical guide for how to play the faction. Under this is a pre-constructed squad and deck for your first time playing. I highly suggest starting here, as it gives you a really good taste of everything the faction has to offer. At the bottom is the shrine and its passive abilities. In the middle, you have the banner and its abilities, which can be used during your active turn. At the bottom is the names for all the faction tokens. To the right is all the squad cards, both basic mode and the flipped mode, with any important notes next to them. On the back are all of the action cards for the faction, with detailed descriptions for each. Alright, so that was a lot to take in, but the game is pretty streamlined and easy to understand when you start playing. I will be doing a series of strategy videos for each of the factions in the upcoming weeks, so look out for those. Thank you for watching this episode of Strategy Games with Strategy James, where we learn to play the Edge Dawnfall. If you would like to see more of these videos, please hit that like button.